For this example, we're going to be using radians. So we have cosine of 11 pi over 12, and this is example 3 of using half angles to figure out trig ratios at certain angles. So the question is, how do we use a half angle if we're given 11 pi over 12 to figure out what that is? Well, notice that 11 pi over 12 is nothing more than half of 11 pi over 6. And 11 pi over 6 is actually on the unit circle. It's right before 12 pi over 6, which is 2 pi. In fact, I will even sketch that for you. So we're talking about an angle, and I'll do it in orange just because. We're talking about this angle right here. It's the same as 330 degrees. Okay, so if we cut that in half, we actually get 11 pi over 12, which is just before pi. So that's what we're looking for. Step 1, we want to find theta, which I basically just did. Now, if you can't remember how to find theta, just double the angle you're trying to solve for, and you will get 11 pi over 6. And 11 pi over 6 is a familiar angle we can use to find 11 pi over 12. Step 2 is to write out the formula. So we're trying to figure out cosine. So we're going to use the cosine half angle formula. Cosine of theta over 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine theta over 2. Step 3 is to plug in theta. So again, the theta is the familiar angle, 11 pi over 6 or 330 degrees. Once you cut that in half, you will get 11 pi over 12, which is exactly what we're trying to solve for. And that's equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of 11 pi over 6 over 2. So all we're doing is plugging in that theta into the formula. And again, I can't say it enough, but the theta you're plugging in is the familiar angle, trying to solve for the unfamiliar one, which is 11 pi over 12. All right, and again, you need to know the unit circle very well. So what is cosine of 11 pi over 6? Well, if we sketch that again, well, actually, let's just go back here to our little sketch right here. We know that this point on the unit circle is square root of 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. Cosine is x, so cosine is square root of 3 over 2. If you don't know that, like the back of your hand, you need to go back and watch those lessons on unit circles that I have on my channel. Okay, so we're going to be replacing this with square root of 3 over 2. And I don't know why I plugged in a negative, but it is indeed positive, so let me fix that. Okay, so I'll fix that, and again, I know that it's positive square root of 3 over 2 because if we're looking at 11 pi over 6, we are in the fourth quadrant, and I know that at 11 pi over 6, which is 330 degrees, x is positive. So it is indeed positive square root of 3 over 2. So what happens is you have to combine the tops of this fraction, and so 1 needs to become 2 over 2, so it has the same denominator here. So you get 2 plus the square root of 3 over 2 on top. The 2 is going to stay on the bottom, which is part of the half angle formula. And remember, we're trying to solve for cosine of 11 pi over 12. Next, we want to combine the tops. So we're just going to get, we're going to combine the 2 and the 2. So it's going to become 2 divided by 2 is 4, so it's going to become 2 plus the square root of 3 divided by 4. Next, we can distribute this square root in both the top and bottom. By the way, I didn't mention this too much. I need to mention this though. Our final answer is going to be negative, so when you're talking about the plus or minus in the formula, we're going to choose minus here because 11 pi over 12, as I notated right here, is right above pi. It's in the second quadrant, so therefore our final answer will indeed be negative, so we will put the negative in front of that square root sign. Okay, so we will distribute the square root to the top and bottom here. We get the square root of 4, which is 2, and then finally we're just going to pull the 2 out into the front and make it a fraction, and that's going to give us our final answer of cosine of 11 pi over 12 is equal to negative 1/2 times the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3. Indeed, a very complicated answer, and like I said before, we can come up with a much simpler answer when we use a difference in sum formulas for trig functions. For right now, we don't know that, so we're going to stick to this. Now, I was able to plug this into my calculator, and it gave me something like negative 0.96, something very close to 1. I want to show you visually what this would look like and why it's so close to 1. So if we draw the angle 11 pi over 12, we get something which is close, something very close to the x-axis. Now we know that the x value here on the unit circle is negative 1, 0, and we know that cosine is indeed the x value. So it only makes sense that the number we get back is very close to -1. So again, cosine of 11 pi over 12 is very close to 180 or pi, and we would expect our answer to be very close to -1. So again, the final answer is -1/2 times the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3, which is around -0.96, give or take. That's it for this particular example of finding cosine of 11 pi over 12 using a half angle formula. If you have any other questions about this, let me know.